Welcome to District Deep Dive. This is the first episode in my new deep dive series covering all 5 Hunger Games books. I will be covering foreshadowing, lore, symbolism, things you missed in the books, things you definitely missed if you only watched the movies, and so much more. Before we begin, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with your fellow Hunger Games fans because it really does help with the algorithm. Quickly, at the top of this brand new series, if you don't know me, this is not going to be a normal let's talk about the Hunger Games video. This is going to be a deep dive series by a walking encyclopedia of Hunger Games knowledge. If you can't tell from behind me, I have been obsessed with this series for the past 12 years. I was on a show called The Biggest Hunger Games Fan, and let's just say that if the Hunger Games knowledge was like a collegiate degree, I would not only have multiple doctorates in it, but I would have written the course. You don't get the nickname Katniss from multiple people by being normal about this series. So now that that's out of the way, you know who your deep dive teacher is here. Let's just get into it. Each episode, I'm going to be covering 4 to 5 chapters of that book. The Hunger Games books are broken down into 3 parts, or 3 acts, so each act will have 2 parts. And lastly, before we officially get into this is a deep dive series of all the Hunger Games books. If you have not read Sunrise on the Reaping, comment down below letting me know you want a spoiler-free version of this series, and then leave. Please. This is your spoiler warning for Sunrise on the Reaping. You should experience the trauma that is Sunrise on the Reaping with no spoilers. This is your final warning. So now let's officially get into it. To start out, I'm going to do a recap of the chapters we'll be covering. So if you haven't read the books in a while, I'm always going to suggest rereading them. But if you haven't, I've got you covered. And if you don't know what something is in the chapter recap, don't worry, I will be talking about it afterwards. Part 1. The Tributes. Chapter 1. We begin the series with Katniss Everdeen waking up the morning of the Reaping for the 74th annual Hunger Games. She immediately reaches for her younger sister, Primrose, on the bed they share, but sees that her sister has crawled into bed with their mother due to the nightmares of what today will bring. Getting out of bed, Katniss dresses, braids her hair, and grabs the Reaping Day gift Prim has left for her before heading to the woods outside of District 12. Crawling under the supposedly electrified barbed wire fence that encompasses the entire district, she enters the woods beyond. After retrieving her bow and a quiver of arrows from a hollow log, she sets off to meet with her best friend and hunting partner, Gale Hawthorne. The two discuss the upcoming reaping as they sit and eat. Gale then proposes the idea of the two of them running off to live in the woods, only if they didn't have so many kids to take care of, meaning their younger siblings. Katniss finds this idea preposterous and states that she never wants to have kids. After spending the next few hours fishing and gathering, Katniss and Gale head back to trade at the Hop. They also make a stop at Mayor Undersea's house to trade strawberries. The mayor's daughter, Madge, opens the door. During their conversation, Katniss sees a small circular gold pin adorning the girl's Reaping Day dress. Parting ways with Gale, Katniss makes her way home to get ready for the reaping, where her mother gives her one of her dresses. Staying calm for Prim's sake, Katniss jokingly tells her sister to tuck your tail in, little duck, after seeing the too big shirt has become untucked in the back of her skirt. At 1 o'clock, the Everdeens head to the square and check in for the reaping. Because of the Tesserae they've each taken out, Katniss's name is entered 20 times. Gale 42. Prim's name only once, due to Katniss refusing to let her take out any Tesserae. At 2 o'clock, the reaping begins with Mayor Underseas reading the history of Panem, after which he reads the names of past District 12 victors. Only one of 2 is still alive, Amos Abernathy, who drunkenly staggers to the stage and attempts to hug District 12's escort, Effie Trinket. Mayor Underseas, trying to get things moving along as the reaping is being televised, introduces Effie, who gives the signature, "May the odds be ever in your favor" line. She then crosses over to the bowl with the girls' names, choosing a slip, and reads the name out of District 12's female tribute, Primrose Everdeen. Chapter 2. Stunned to the point of almost fainting, Katniss sees the blood-drained face of her little sister walking towards the stage. The ducktail formed by Prim's untucked shirt brings her out of her state of shock, yelling for Prim as she makes her way through the crowd. Pushing Prim behind her before she can mount the stage, Katniss volunteers as tribute. Because of the lack of volunteers in District 12, there's some confusion, but the mayor allows her to come forward. Refusing to let go, Gale comes forward to pull a screaming Prim off her sister. Katniss then mounts the stage and tells her name to an excited Effie, who asks the crowd to give her a round of applause. Except the people of District 12 are silent, and instead touch the 3 middle fingers of their left hand to their mouth and extend it out to Katniss. Haymitch then stumbles forward and throws an arm around Katniss, who is struggling not to cry or show emotion. He then yells that she has a lot of spunk. He then directs his ire at the camera, shouting, pointing a finger, saying, "More than you," before he tumbles headfirst off the stage. As Haymitch is taken away by Stretcher, Effie quickly chooses and reads out the boy's name, Peeta Mellark. While she has never directly spoken with him, Katniss knows Peeta. She watches as he takes the stage, neither of his brothers coming forward when Effie asks for volunteers. As the mayor reads the Treaty of Treason, Katniss remembers her impactful but only real interaction with Peeta. After the death of her father 5 years ago and the catatonic state her mother fell into as a result, Katniss's family was slowly dying of starvation. After desperately digging through the baker's trash and being yelled at by the baker's wife, Katniss had sat down against the tree behind the baker's pigs, giving up, when she heard the baker's wife screaming again. Peeta had, accidentally, burned 2 loaves of bread, taking a beating from his mother because of it. Instead of throwing it to the pigs like he was instructed to do, he threw them to Katniss. Hurriedly picking them up, Katniss had raced home to her starving mother and sister. After seeing him at school the next day, she didn't say anything to him, but she locked eyes with him for a moment before glancing down. That's when she noticed a yellow dandelion growing and remembered all the time she spent with her father in the woods. She realized then what she was going to do to keep her and her family alive. In present time, the mayor finishes the Treaty of Treason, and Katniss and Peeta shake hands. Peeta gives her hand a squeeze before they turn to face the crowd as the anthem of Panem plays. Katniss thinks that with 24 tributes, the odds are that someone else will kill him before she has to, but quote, the odds have not been very dependable as of late. Chapter 3. Katniss and Peeta are escorted into the Justice Building and separated into different rooms for the allotted 1 hour time to say goodbye to their loved ones. Katniss tries to keep herself calm, not allowing herself to cry because of the cameras that will be at the train station afterwards. Prim and their mother come to see Katniss first. She starts telling them what they're going to need to do now that she will no longer be there. Katniss then angrily insists to her mother that she cannot leave again, and she needs to be there for Prim. Her mother Astrid insists she won't and can treat her illness now. Prim then says she'll be okay and asks her to take care of herself, to really try and win. Katniss promises to do the best for her, although privately she doesn't believe she'll be able to do so. Then, a peacekeeper opens the door, signaling that the Everdeens' time is up. Peeta's father, Otho Mellark, comes in next, to Katniss' surprise. She does know the baker somewhat, but Prim knows him better. He silently sits down and hands Katniss a bag of cookies. After thanking him in a failed attempt at conversation, the two sit in silence until the peacekeeper signals his time is up. Mr. Mellark tells Katniss that he will keep an eye on Prim and make sure she's eating before he leaves. This statement relieves Katniss somewhat. Madge enters the room next, also unexpected for Katniss. Madge asks Katniss to promise to wear her golden pin in the arena as her district token before pinning it to her dress. Katniss promises to do so, and as she leaves, she realizes Madge has always been her friend. Gale is the last to arrive, hugging her as soon as he walks in. He immediately starts in on surviving the games, telling her she needs to get her hands on a bow, even if she has to make a weak one. He tells her that she's the best hunter he knows, and that the games are just hunting and that she knows how to kill. Katniss counters that it's different with people, but he disagrees. As the peacekeepers emerge, Katniss begs Gale not to let her family starve. Assuring her he won't, he starts to tell Katniss to remember something, but is cut off by the door slamming between them. Afterwards, Katniss and Peeta are taken to the train. Thinking she's been right not to cry as the cameras are everywhere, she notices that Peeta has made no such attempts. She briefly wonders if this will be his strategy in the games. Once on the train, it speeds off, leaving Katniss to explore the accommodations. She realizes it's more luxurious than anywhere she's ever been or seen. After showering for the first time, not bathing, showering, she pins the pin Madge gave her to her new clothes. She then realizes for the first time that the bird on the pin is a Mockingjay. Thinking back to the history of the creation of Mockingjays and her father's fondness for them, she finds the bird comforting. Effie summons Katniss for supper, where she finds Peeta waiting, but Haymitch absent. After gorging themselves on the fine food, they watch the recap of the reapings, a few tributes standing out to Katniss. Upset at the state her wig was in, Effie says that Haymitch has a lot to learn about presentation, to which Katniss and Peeta joke about him being drunk like he is every year. Irritated at this, Effie states that he may well be the difference between their life and death. Just then, Haymitch drunkenly enters the room before vomiting and falling into it. Effie tells them to laugh away as she leaves the car. Chapter 4. Katniss and Peeta drag a vomit-covered Haymitch back to his room to the tub and turn on the shower. Peeta offers to take it from there, to which Katniss agrees and offers to send in a Capitol attendant to help, which Peeta declines. Understanding Peeta not wanting help from anyone from the Capitol, Katniss wonders why he wouldn't just want to make them help as a form of revenge. She then realizes that Peeta is just being kind. That's dangerous for her, because kind people have a habit of worming their way into her heart, and she can't afford to let that happen with Peeta for where they're going. She decides to have as little to do with him as she can, tossing the cookies Mr. Mellark gave her out the train window, which lands in a patch of dandelions. This sight brings back the memory of the bread and the dandelion that gave her hope. She remembers her and Prom collecting a bucket full of the weeds that day to eat, studying her family's plant book with medicinal and edible plants. She remembers going to the woods without her father and killing a rabbit on her own for the first time. How their mother slowly started to come back to them, and although Prim was overjoyed, Katniss no longer trusted her and kept her at a distance. Thinking of her family, she gets in bed, too numb or tired to finally cry. When Effie wakes her in the morning, she enters for breakfast to see Effie, Peeta, and Haymitch sitting at the table. After eating as much as she can, she surveys her companions, watching Haymitch drinking some type of spirit. She realizes then that she detests him, blaming him as one of the reasons 12's tributes never survive. Katniss says that he's supposed to give them advice, to which he responds, "Here's some advice. Stay alive." This not only irritates Katniss, but Peeta as well. He knocks the drink from Haymitch's hand, and in response, Haymitch punches Peeta in the jaw and knocks him to the floor. When he attempts to reach for more liquor, Katniss drives her knife between his hand and the bottle. Asking if he actually got a pair of fighters this year, Haymitch offers his first real piece of advice to Peeta, telling him not to ice the bruise that he caused to make it look like Peeta had fought another tribute. Haymitch then asks Katniss if she can hit anything with that knife, to which Katniss grabs the knife and throws it at a wall across the room. After seeing this, Haymitch inspects them both. He then makes a deal with them to stay sober enough to help them as long as they don't interfere with his drinking and do what they're told. After passing through the tunnel under a mountain, which Katniss greatly dislikes, they enter the Capitol, both of them running to the window to look out. Noting how grandeur everything is from the buildings to the people, Katniss backs away from the window as they arrive at the train station, where a crowd has gathered, sickened by their excitement. Peeta, however, remains at the window, smiling and waving to the crowd. At this, Katniss thinks that his actions since the reaping may have all been part of a plan of his to stay alive, meaning, quote, that kind Peter Malark, the boy who gave me the bread, is fighting hard to kill me. So now that we have a chapter recap, I'm going to jump into some more topics. What are the Hunger Games? The Hunger Games were created by Casca Highbottom, which I will get into the history on that later, and they were implemented after the Dark Days. Every year on July 4th, one girl and one boy between the ages of 12 and 18 in each district are selected as tributes in a reaping ceremony to fight to the death in an outdoor arena until only one remains. This is televised to the entire nation and is required viewing by law. The arenas vary every year in terms of terrain, weapons provided, and longevity. They serve as a yearly reminder of the Dark Days and punishment for the district's uprising. So what is the reaping exactly? The reaping is a yearly televised event in the districts of Panem where one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 are chosen, or reaped, to compete in that year's Hunger Games. It's supposed to be treated as a festivity, with workers given the day off. After signing in, children 12 to 18 are herded into roped-off areas, the youngest in the back, the oldest in the front, and families of the children line up around the ropes. So what does the reaping look like specifically in District 12 during the year of the 74th Annual Hunger Games? The reaping is held in the square with a temporary stage built in front of the Justice Building for the event. It's not large enough to hold the entire population, so latecomers are directed to watch on side streets on screens. There are 3 seats on the stage, one for Mayor Underseas, one for District 12's escort Effie Trinket, and one for District 12's only living victor, Hamish Abernathy. There's also a podium and 2 large glass bowls, one holding the slips with the girls' names and the other for the boys. Everyone must attend the reaping no matter their age, unless you're at death's door, which peacekeepers will come around afterwards and check if that's the case. And if not, you'll be imprisoned. The reaping system works like this. At age 12, you begin to be eligible for the reaping and, quote, your name is entered once. At 13, twice, and so on until you reach the age of 18, the final year of eligibility, when your name goes in the pool 7 times. However, you can also add your name in more times in exchange for Tesserae for you and your family, which I will go over Tesserae in just a second. You can also volunteer for the games. If you are within reaping age and a tribute's name is read, another eligible girl, if it's a girl called, or another eligible boy, if it's a boy called, can volunteer as tribute. In District 12, volunteers are very rare. This is how the system works there. In some districts, however, winning is considered a big honor, so their volunteer system gets a little more complicated. The reaping also provides a way for the capital to keep tabs on that district's population. The reapings are aired live and are staggered throughout the day, making it possible for someone to watch all of them live, but that's really only possible for capital citizens. District 12's reaping starts at 2 p.m. During the year of the 74th Hunger Games, to start out the reaping ceremony, the mayor reads out the story/history of Panem, and after the names are called, he recites the Treaty of Treason. During the year of the 50th Hunger Games, the anthem of Panem plays, and the crowd is supposed to sing along. The screens around the square show, quote, images of the capital's power, armies of marching peacekeepers, airborne fleets of hovercraft, tanks parading through the wide avenues of the capital, up to the presidential mansion, end quote. Once the anthem ends, the mayor recites the Treaty of Treason. The district escort then picked the tributes. And then during the 74th Hunger Games, the anthem was played after the tributes were called. So I mentioned Tesserae. What is that? It's a type of food rationing system. Each Tesserae you take out is worth 1 year's supply of grain and oil for one person, and then you can take out Tesserae for each member of your family. Only reaping age children are eligible for this. And as I mentioned, every Tesserae you take out also gets your name added in the reaping an additional time, and the entries are cumulative. For example, in Katniss's situation, her name is in the reaping 20 times by the age of 16 because, quote, at the age of 12, I had my name entered 4 times, 1 because I had to, and 3 times for Tesserae for grain and oil for myself, Prim, and my mother. In fact, every year I have needed to do this, and the entries are cumulative. So now, at the age of 16, my name will be in the reaping 20 times. Also, Tesserae is the name of the gold and ebony cube tiles that was used by wealthy capital citizens for decor before the Dark Days. For now, I will give a brief history of Panem, the Dark Days, and the Treaty of Treason. Panem is the country in the ruins that was once North America. That comprised 13 districts, now 12, and the capital. After a 3-long civil war known as the Dark Days, District 13 was quote-unquote destroyed, and the Treaty of Treason was signed after the district's failed rebellion. So, in short, the Treaty of Treason is what establishes the Hunger Games in punishment for the district's uprising. Each district in Panem produces specific food and goods, most of which the resources go to the capital. I will go into more specifics later, but the general overview of what each district supplies is as follows. District 1, luxury goods. District 2, masonry. Also, peacekeepers. District 3, electronics. District 4, fishing. District 5, electricity and power. District 6, transportation. District 7, lumber. District 8, textiles. District 9, grain. District 10, livestock. District 11, agriculture. And District 12, coal mining. And District 13 was graphite mining officially, although their main export was nuclear weapons. Communication and travel is strictly limited in Panem. To quote Katniss, travel between the districts is forbidden except for official sanctioned duties. Now, as for the schools in the districts, it's pretty limited, and the curriculum includes propaganda from the capital, and it's individualized for each district's export. So in District 12, they have basic reading and math, but most of it is coal related or ties in to something to do with coal. But they do have a weekly lecture on the history of Panem, which, according to Katniss, is just a bunch of blather about what the districts and its citizens owe the capital. So now we are going to focus specifically on District 12. It is the smallest and poorest of the districts with a population of about 8,000 people. District 12 is in the area formerly known as the Appalachian region. They're largely ignored by the capital as long as the district hits their quota for coal, because coal mining is the district's main export. District 12 has also only had 2 victors up till this point. It's broken into 2 parts, the seam and the town. People in the town are known as merchants and are typically what is considered well off for District 12. They own businesses, which they live atop of, and these include a bakery, an apothecary, a shoe shop, and a sweet shop. Also about the merchants, they tend to have blonde hair and blue eyes for their features. The Justice Building is also located in town. This is where official capital business is conducted, and there's one in every district. It's where the victors make their appearances for the victory tour. It's where the reapings are held and where tributes are taken to say goodbye to their families after the reaping, along with some other capital business. This includes signing up for Tesserae, getting a marriage license, and in District 12 specifically, it's where the eldest children of mining accident victims receive a Medal of Valor. The seam is where the poorest of the district resides, which includes the mining families. A lot of the family that live in the seam share similar traits of having dark hair, olive skin, and gray eyes. The streets are lined with coal dust and have what is described as squat gray houses. It's not out of the ordinary for people of District 12 to just fall over dead from starvation, especially in the seam. While the merchants do tend to be better off, there is still some food scarcity in their families. There's also a community home for orphan kids or children that are taken away from their families. However, it is not a safe place. Katniss recalls, quote, "I'd grown up seeing those home kids at school, the sadness, the marks of angry hands on their faces, and the hopelessness that curled their shoulders forward." Katniss's house is towards the edge of the scene, closer to the meadow, which is just a field that the locals call the meadow. Separating the meadow and the woods that surround District 12 is a high electric chain link fence with barbed wire on top that encloses the entire district. It's used to keep out wild animals from the forest, but more importantly, to keep its citizens in. While the fence is supposed to be electrified 24 hours a day, the district is lucky to get a few hours of electricity at all, so the fence is rarely turned on. There are also multiple holes and entrances in this fence due to its neglect, so it makes it possible for those who wish to get into the woods to do so. There is a 2-foot stretch of fence concealed by bushes that has been loose for years that Katniss usually enters the woods through because it's so close to her home. Although going through the fence is against the law, and especially poaching from the woods. Some of the wild animals that live in these woods are packs of wild dogs, cougars, bears, venomous snakes, lynx, and other rabid animals. Also, trackerjacker nest, which is a capital mutation, but I will cover those later on. There is a black market that also operates in District 12 that's referred to as the Hob. It's an abandoned warehouse that used to hold coal, but it fell into disuse, and the Hob just slowly took over. This is also where the Covey used to perform, but that's for ballad. Speaking of coal mines are not safe. The miners have to dig very deep because even hundreds of years ago, coal was being mined from that region, the Appalachian region. The district doctor is responsible for taking care of injured miners, although they're also brought to Astrid Everdeen for care. In the event of a mine accident, sirens across the district will sound. If at school, children are not expected to wait for dismissal and may leave if that happens. After the explosion that killed Katniss and Prim's father, people had crowded at the main entrance to the mine after the sirens started. A rope had been strung to keep the crowd back, and the elevators brought up what survivors there were left throughout the night. A canary is also brought down into the coal mines to alert if the air is bad. If it stops singing, that's a sign you need to get out. If the air is too bad, the bird will just die, and with that, so will the miners. Accidents also seem to be very common. Katniss's father was killed in a mine explosion. Hamish's father was killed in a coal mine fire, and Ripper, the woman who sells white liquor in 12, lost an arm in a mining accident. Astrid also commonly treats victims of mining accidents. And there is a graveyard for miners as well. Miners are paid in scrip instead of cash, which is only good at the capital store where the miners shop. However, there are some merchants that will accept it. Miners are also not allowed to take home any coal and must purchase it. Every year, the school children are also taken on a tour of the mines for their training. At age 18, you start working in the mines unless you're able to make money doing some other business. There's also above ground mining jobs, but those are obviously very coveted. I'm going to briefly touch on the capital. The capital is built in the formerly named Rockies region. The mountain acts as a barrier between it and the eastern districts. The capital is both where the richest of Panem reside and its governing body. It's home to President Snow, the country's leader/dictator. Its citizens do not participate in the Hunger Games and instead treat it as an annual sporting event. They see the Hunger Games as their patriotic duty that they're supporting for the greater good. Capital citizens also speak with an accent that Katniss describes as being high-pitched, their jaws barely opening when they talk, and the ends of their sentences go up as if they're asking a question, which I feel like that's kind of what influencer accents have turned into. They have, quote, odd vowels, clipped words, and always hiss on the letter S. Capital citizens also tend to be wasteful and shallow with extreme fashion choices. With shiny cars and colorfully dressed people, the capital has, quote, glistening buildings and a rainbow of hues that tower in the air, end quote. The capital is also very technologically advanced and uses that technology to make the Hunger Games into a spectacle. Now, jumping into characters we meet in this set of chapters. This is all also background up to the point of the 74th Hunger Games, so I'm not going over stuff that happens after this. I'm also not going over everything right now. I'm obviously going to start out with the Everdeen family. Obviously, Katniss Everdeen. She was born May 8th and is a 16-year-old girl that lives in the Seam. She was named after the Katniss plant. She's described as having the Seam look, meaning olive skin, gray eyes, and dark hair that she usually keeps in a long braid down her back. She hunts and gathers in the woods illegally outside the district to feed and provide for her mother and her younger sister. She took over as provider of the family at age 11 after the death of her father 5 years previously and her mother's subsequent fall into major depression and a catatonic state. She also still suffers from nightmares of her father's death. She's protective, brave, stubborn, and loves her sister Prim more than anything. She's a natural with the bow and arrow, knows a, quote, few basic snares, and enjoys being in the woods. She knows how to survive off the land thanks to her father, and knows medicinal herbs thanks to her mother. She keeps to herself, not having many friends, and she doesn't trust easily. She also inherited her father's gift for singing, although she rarely does it after her father's death. When she was younger, she used to openly talk about her dislike for District 12 and Panem's rulers in the capital, which used to scare her mother to death. As she got older, though, she learned that voicing her opinions would only lead to trouble, so she, quote, I learned to hold my tongue and to turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read my thoughts, do work quietly in school, make only polite small talk in the public market, discuss little more than trades in the hob, end quote. She also avoids discussing difficult topics even at home. Quote, even at home when I'm less pleasant, I avoid discussing tricky topics like the reaping or food shortages or the Hunger Games. Prim might begin to repeat my words, and then where would we be? Speaking of Prim, aka Primrose Everdeen, she was born in late May and is obviously the younger sister of Katniss. She is 12 years old, she has blonde hair and blue eyes like her mother, and she was named after the evening primrose. Prim is gentle and takes after her mother's love and talent for healing. She loves animals, so much so that the couple times that Katniss tried to teach her how to hunt, she would get all teary and say that maybe if they made it home quick enough, they may be able to heal it. She has an orange tomcat that she loves named Buttercup, that she named after the flower, and a goat that she milks named Lady, who Katniss gave to her on her 10th birthday. She was so excited about getting Lady that she started laughing and crying. After her father's death, she continued to polish his shaving mirror because she knew how much he hated the layer of coal dust that accumulated on everything in the Seam. She would also brush and braid her mother's hair before going to school when she was in her catatonic light state. If she saw her older sister crying, she would cry before she even knew the reason. As a toddler, she would climb into Katniss's lap and lay her head on her shoulder. The people of District 12 are fond of Prim as well. She trades at the hob like her big sister, but instead of game, she sells her goat cheese. And if she's in the square, she always drags Katniss to go see the pretty display of cakes in the bakery. Now on to Katniss and Prim's parents. We finally learned their first names in Sunrise on the Reaping, not just Mrs. Everdeen and Mr. Everdeen. Astrid March Everdeen is originally from the town and, like her daughter, has blonde hair and blue eyes. She is also a healer. After marrying Burdock Everdeen, she moved to the Seam. Her family also used to own an apothecary shop in town. She has extensive knowledge of natural remedies and herbs. When the old peacekeeper used to deal out whippings left and right, she is who they took the victims to. She also now runs a small apothecary of her own for people in the Seam. Though she may be part of the district's poorer class now, she kept some of her belongings from her merchant past, like a tea set and some dresses and clothes, which are all very special to her. After the death of her husband 5 years ago, she went into a depressive/catatonic state where she just wouldn't respond or acknowledge her daughters or anyone at all, or if she did, it was very rarely. Quote, she didn't do anything but sit propped up in a chair or, more often, huddled under the blankets of her bed, eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Once in a while, she'd stir, get up as if moved by some urgent purpose, only then to collapse back to stillness. No amount of pleading for Prim seemed to affect her. And lastly, for the Everdeen family, we have Burdock Everdeen, which we finally learned his first name too. He is the deceased father of Katniss and Prim. He was born and raised in the Seam. He was a hunter. He taught Katniss how to shoot and survive off the land. He was also skilled at crafting bows. He also met their mother, Astrid, because on his hunts he would collect medicinal herbs and then he would sell to her family so they could brew them into remedies. His legal job was coal mining. Like I mentioned, he hated the layer of coal dust that covered everything in the Seam. He also had a very lovely singing voice, so much so that the birds, especially mockingjays, would stop to listen and then pick up his tune. He was killed in January 5 years previously due to a mine explosion. Next we have Hita Malark. So he is a 16-year-old boy from the Seam. He has blonde hair that falls into waves on his forehead, blue eyes, and he's stocky in build. He works at his family's bakery and he loves to paint. He decorates the cakes at his family's bakery, which are the cakes that Prim sees in the display. He's also the youngest in his family with 2 older brothers. He is kind, strong, charismatic, and he can be sarcastic. He came in second place in a wrestling competition at school, only losing to one of his older brothers. He's pretty strong. He can lift 100-pound sacks of flour, and he's friends with other merchant kids. While he's never directly spoken to her, he has had a crush on Katniss since they were 5 years old, and he heard her sing in music assembly class. I will obviously talk a lot more about that later. He helped save Katniss and her family from starvation after the death of Burdock. When they were 11 years old, Katniss had grown desperate and was looking through the merchant's trash cans like I talked about earlier. Peeta saw his mother yelling at Katniss and then realized she's starving. He intentionally burned 2 loaves of bread knowing he was going to be beat for it, which he was. And instead of throwing those 2 burned loaves of bread to the pigs like he was instructed to do, he threw them to Katniss. Next we have Otho Mellark. He is District 12's baker. His parents owned the bakery before he took it over. Like Peeta, he is also blonde and a big, broad-shouldered man with burn scars on his hands from the ovens. Haymitch describes him when he's a teenager that he's a big lug of a guy with meaty hands. He's a big dude. He's also not a very talkative man, but he is much nicer than his wife. Peeta also says that Otho likes Katniss and Prim and that he thinks he wishes he had, quote, a daughter instead of a house full of boys. Otho also knew Astrid when they were kids. When Peeta was 5, Otho tells Peeta that he wanted to marry Katniss's mom, but that she ran off with a coal miner, Burdock, because the birds stopped to listen to him sing. He often trades with Katniss for squirrels when his wife isn't home, and trades Prim a generous amount of bread for 2 of her goat cheese. They're not actually named, but they are mentioned in this set of chapters, so I'm going to cover them really quick. We have Mrs. Mellark, who is Otho Mellark's wife. She works at the bakery, and she's abusive. We have the eldest Mellark son. He works in the bakery, and he is over 18 at the time of the 74th reaping. The middle Mellark son is either 17 or 18, and he works in the bakery and is strong like Peeta because he won the school wrestling match against Peeta. Now, the Underseas family. We have Mayor Underseas. He is a tall, balding man, the mayor of District 12. He has a fondness for strawberries and regularly buys them from Katniss and Gale. Though forging is technically illegal, he's more lenient towards those kind of laws, and he doesn't have a taste for public floggings or executions. 5 years ago, he presented Katniss, the oldest child in her family, with a Medal of Valor for her deceased father after his death in the mines. Madge Underseas. She is the daughter of Marilee Donner Underseas, who I will talk about later, and Mayor Underseas. Madge is a quiet 16-year-old blonde girl who usually keeps to herself, like Katniss. Because neither of them really have a group of friends, the 2 usually end up together at school. Like when they're eating lunch, they sit together at assemblies, and they're partners for sporting activities. Although the 2 rarely talk, they are friends. She also enjoys playing the piano. Madge inherited a gold Mockingjay pin from her deceased aunt, Maisie Donner. So next we have the previous victors of District 12, the most recent one, Haymitch Abernathy. I will go into much more detail about Haymitch later on. For now, he was born on July 4th, Reaping Day, specifically on the day of the reaping for the 34th annual Hunger Games. At 16 years old, he became the victor of the 50th Hunger Games and second quarter quell. Now in present day time, Haymitch Abernathy is a paunchy 40-year-old man who is District 12's only living victor. He turned into an alcoholic after his games, death of his loved ones, and being the sole mentor for tributes in District 12. He also isolated himself and he began sleeping with a knife. He doesn't like to sleep when it's dark or when it's dark outside. He's originally from the Seam and has the Seam look with dark curly hair and gray seam eyes. He is sarcastic and can be harsh, but that is not all there is to Haymitch. Now, there is an unnamed victor mentioned in this set of chapters, but we obviously learn from the Battle of Songbirds and Snakes that the unnamed victor is Lucy Greybeard, which I'm not going to talk about her right now, but I just want to point out that we get a Lucy Gray mention without a Lucy Gray mention. She is the victor of the 10th Hunger Games. We also get a mention of Joanna Mason, who I will talk about in Catching Fire, but she is mentioned by name here. She is a victor from District 7 who won her games by pretending to be weak and cowardly, but then once there was only a couple people left, she came out swinging literally because her weapon of choice is an axe. So now on to other District 12 residents that we meet. Gale Hawthorne. He is an 18-year-old boy from the Seam of District 12. He lost his father in the same mining accident as Katniss, and he was either helping or single-handedly feeding his family for the past 7 years. He is the oldest of 4 siblings, him having 2 younger brothers, Rory and Vic, and then a baby sister named Posey. His mother's name is Sazelle, but I'm going to talk about her and his siblings in Catching Fire. He's described as having the Seam look, like I said, Katniss noting that he could be her brother because of his gray eyes, olive skin, and straight black hair. At just 14 years old, he stood at over 6 feet tall. Gale is a skilled trapper, and while he may not be as good with the bow as Katniss is, he's also a hunter. I will go over more about their meeting later on, but I will just say for now, the 2 of them met about 6 months after Katniss took over as head of her family, when Gale was 14 and Katniss was 12. His nickname for Katniss is Catnip, which is a result of their first meeting when Katniss said her name so quietly he thought she said catnip, and then it became his official nickname for her when a lynx started following her around the woods. He cares and helps provide for his family by illegally hunting in the woods. He can be stubborn and hot-headed, and oftentimes will yell and rage in the woods about his hatred for the capital. There's never been anything romantic between Gale and Katniss, but Gale has recently developed feelings for her about 6 months previous to this, although he has not said anything to Katniss. Okay, on to one of the most, I think, important characters in the series, Buttercup. Because he is a District 12 resident, I love Buttercup. He is Prim's scruffy orange tomcat, and he loves Prim more than anything. He guards her at night, and to quote Katniss, he has a mashed-in nose, half of one ear missing, eyes the color of rotting squash. Prim named him Buttercup, insisting that his muddy yellow coat matched the bright flower. Him and Katniss have a love-hate relationship. When Prim brought him home as a kitten, he was scrawny and he had fleas and worms in his stomach. And Katniss tried to drown him because he was just going to be another mouth to feed, and she's head of the family at the ripe old age of 11. See, like, I love Katniss, I relate to her so much, but this is the exact opposite. I love cats, okay? So after Katniss tries to drown him, Prim just starts begging and crying to let him stay, and eventually she does. Astrid got rid of the vermin, and now he catches mice and rats. After Katniss gleans a kill from hunting, she feeds him the entrails, which has caused him to finally stop hissing at her. I am on Buttercup's side here, by the way. On the other hand, Prim is just his person. If she cries, then he will, quote, nose his way into her arms and curl up there until she calms down and falls asleep. I love cats, so I love Buttercup, but this just, it hurts my heart. He loves Prim so much. He likes to be wrapped in a blanket if it thunders because he's scared of it, but other than that, he is a survivor and he is not really scared of anything. Staying with our animal District 12 citizens, we have Lady, who is Prim's nanny goat. She is white with black patches, and Katniss bought her off the goat man about 2 years ago for Prim's 10th birthday. She had been attacked by an animal, probably a dog, and was about to be sold to the butcher Ruba for meat when Katniss got there. Prim and her mother healed Lady after Katniss gifted her to Prim, and that night, Prim slept next to Lady on a blanket next to the fire, and Lady licked her cheek, as Katniss said, quote, like she was giving her a goodnight kiss. So animals love Prim, and Prim loves animals. Prim's love of animals and her relationship with them is honestly probably the only instance where I relate more to Prim than I do to Katniss, because I would never do that to a cat. Okay, I love cats and animals way too much. Okay, so back to our human residents. We have Greasy Say. She is the bony old woman who sells hot soup from a large kettle in the hob. She can make a soup out of a variety of things. For example, she can be counted on to buy wild dog meat, and she has a winter specialty of mice meat, pig entrails, and tree bark. One of her grandchildren, a granddaughter, is also mentally disabled. The only person from the capital I'm going to be covering right now is Effie Trinket. She is District 12's bright, bubbly escort for the Hunger Games, and she's the one to draw the names at the reaping. Being from the capital, she speaks with a capital accent. On the day of the 74th reaping, she's wearing a spring green suit with pinkish hair, and Katniss says a scary white grin. She's big on manners and appearances. Her role does not stop at the reaping, however. She assures that District 12 tributes are on time, and this year especially, she's talking up Katniss and Peeta to potential sponsors. She is loyal to the capital and rarely speaks out against their ways. And we learned in Sunrise that she met Hamish Abernathy for the first time when he was a tribute in the 50th Hunger Games, and I will cover more on that later. We also have a couple people that are mentioned but not named right now, but we do learn their names later on. So we have the butcher, who, like I said, is named Ruba. We have the head peacekeeper, whose name is Cray, the woman who sells liquor at the hob, Ripper. And then Katniss also mentions a couple tributes that stand out to her during the reaping. We don't know their names yet, but we will. So she mentions the District 2 boy, Cato, the District 5 Foxface girl, Foxface, and we still don't know his name, but the boy from District 10 with the crippled foot also stands out to her. And then, of course, we have the District 11 girl, Rue. Okay, so now that we have an overview of the world and the characters that we've met so far, I'm going to go over foreshadowing, parallels, symbolism, and everything in between. I did save some for later on, but I have a lot to talk about. Okay, to start out, the very first line in this series kind of just foreshadows the entire series. So what do I mean by that? The very first line is, quote, when I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold. Now, that may just seem like, okay, she woke up. What does that have to do with anything? But Suzanne Collins is not one to just, like, put stuff in for the sake of putting it in. Everything has a reason. I just want to say that the very first time we are introduced to Katniss, she is reaching for her sister and she's not there. Her very first action is her reaching for Prim. Just sets up the entire series. So you have Katniss reaching for Prim to save her at the reaping. You have her trying to reach her in the jungle during the quarter quell when the Jabberjays are mimicking Prim's screams. You have her trying to reach her and get to her when District 13 is being bombed. And then finally, of course, you have Katniss trying to get to Prim and reach her before Prim's death. So it's just that one sentence may seem like nothing, but it just kind of foreshadows the whole series. She's reaching for Prim multiple times throughout the series in major moments, and it's just, it's just genius. The first line in this book, the first line in the entire series is setting up that. I've mentioned my love for Buttercup, and I want to cover him a little bit right now. So, still on page 1, we get a parallel to the end of Mockingjay. Buttercup is sitting on the bed with Prim, and he's guarding her. Katniss talks about, their love-hate relationship and how much Buttercup loves Prim. So after returning to District 12 after her sister's death, Buttercup also manages to make his way back to 12, and he's looking for Prim, who, of course, isn't there. After he realizes and understands that Prim's gone, she's dead, he takes over guarding Katniss like he guarded Prim, and it's just, it breaks my heart. Buttercup's relationship with Prim and with Katniss just make me want to cry. I quoted earlier how Katniss described him, but I'm going to re-quote it right here so you can see the parallel with the very beginning of the Hunger Games and then the end of Mockingjay. So, quote again, sitting at Prim's knees, guarding her, is the world's ugliest cat. Mashed in nose, half of one ear missing, eyes the color of rotting squash. And then you have, at the end of Mockingjay, quote, because hours later, when I come to in my bed, he's there in the moonlight, crouched beside me, yellow eyes alert, guarding me from the night. Which just hurts my heart. I love cats, and Buttercup is just, I don't even know how to explain it. I just want to cry. But there's also a parallel with Buttercup with Prim in Mockingjay, and then also that quote at the end when he's watching over Katniss. So after Prim goes and gets him and brings him to the bunker during the bombing of 13, quote, Buttercup's eyes reflect the faint glow of the safety light over the door as he lies in the crook of Prim's arms, back on the job, protecting her from the night. She's snuggled close to my mother. Asleep, they look just as they did the morning of the reaping that landed me in my first games. So right there, that's a parallel. And then you have a Buttercup parallel with that. And that's not even all of them. That's just all I'm covering right now. So this is kind of random, but we have the fence that surrounds District 12. So Katniss mentions that the fence is usually not on, but she usually takes a moment to listen just to be sure. And Catching Fire, she almost doesn't do that because her mind is so preoccupied, and that's when the fence is actually on. I'm going to try to divide this section up with different categories. So like Buttercup, I talked about the fence. Now I'm going to talk about the woods and stuff that happens during that. Katniss mentions that sometimes in the fall, some people will brave going into the woods to harvest apples. And Sunrise on the Reaping, Haymitch talks about that during the fall when he was 10, Burdock Everdeen convinced him to go into the woods with him for the first time to harvest apples. And then when Katniss and Gale are talking, Gale says that he traded with the baker that morning with the squirrel. And in just a couple chapters, Katniss will bring that up when the baker comes to see her. And then we have Katniss mentioning that Gale could be her brother, although they're not related, or at least not closely related. In Catching Fire, it's mentioned that Gale is said to be now the cousin of Katniss because of the star-crossed lover story that her and Peeta had in the games. So it's just kind of a foreshadowing for that. Also, in that same vein, Gale suggests that him and Katniss run off into the woods, if they didn't have so many kids or siblings. And then Katniss is like, that's preposterous. But in Catching Fire, with her family under the threat of snow, Katniss wants to run into the woods. And Gale, while he initially agrees, backs out on that and says, no, I'm not going, because he's learned that Peeta would be coming, obviously, and that there's been uprisings. Katniss also during this conversation says that she never wants to have kids. In Mockingjay, we learn in the epilogue that 15 years after the end of the war, her and Peeta have 2 kids. They have an older girl and a younger boy. And then finally in this little section, we have that Katniss says that there's never been anything romantic between her and Gale. This is just foreshadowing the fact that Gale does have feelings for her, and then their complicated relationship after she comes back from the games. Now I want to talk about some Sunrise on the Reaping stuff and Katniss's parents. Katniss tells us that her mother is originally from a merchant family, and that's how her and Burdock met, because he would sometimes collect medicinal herbs on his hunts and would sell them to Astrid's family's apothecary shop. In Sunrise on the Reaping, we actually get to see this happen, kind of. Haymitch even recognizes a plant in his games, which is called bee balm, as a medicinal plant because he's helped Burdock gather medicinal herbs to sell to Astrid's family's apothecary shop. Katniss talks about how the Mockingjays would fall silent to listen to her father sing or whistle and then repeat the melody back. And then Peeta also says this, that his father told him that when he was a child that the birds would stop to listen to Burdock sing. Haymitch also talks about this the first time he went with Burdock into the woods when they were kids, and the Mockingjays listened to him. Haymitch and Katniss both describe Burdock's voice in a very similar way. Katniss says, quote, his voice was that beautiful, high and clear, and so filled with life it made you want to laugh and cry at the same time. And then Haymitch says, he tilted his head back and sang out in that remarkable voice of his. High and sweet like a grown woman's, but cleaner, nothing warbly about it. And then that gift is also passed down to Katniss. But like a lot of things, I'll talk about that later. Katniss mentions that there's a tiny sweet shop in District 12, but they can never afford to get candy from there. Well, the Donner family is the owner of the sweet shop during the 50th Hunger Games. Katniss says that you would expect Madge to be stuck up because she's the mayor's daughter, but that she isn't. Her aunt, Maisley Donner, however, was known to Haymitch to be the most stuck-up girl in town before the games. Her father was also thought to be the successor to District 12's mayor. Now, I want to talk about this interaction between Katniss and Prim. So this is after Katniss volunteers and they're saying their goodbyes. It just breaks my heart. Prim asks her to try and win. And Katniss doesn't really think she can, but she says, then we'd be as rich as Haymitch. And then Prim responds, quote, "I don't care for rich. I just want you to come home. You will try, won't you? Really, really try?" Asks Prim. "Really, really try. I swear it," I say. "And I know, because of Prim, I'll have to." Katniss's love for Prim is a major driving point in the series. It just shows how much Prim also loves Katniss. Okay, now, unfortunately, on to Gale. If you can't tell, I don't like him. We have beef, but I will talk about his attitude later on, but I'm going to cover it anyway, even if I don't like Gale. When Gale comes to say goodbye to Katniss, he gives her a hug, and Katniss again reiterates there's never been anything romantic between her and Gale. So if she were to go off and, I don't know, kiss a guy that's not Gale, he should have nothing to say about that, right? He can't be mad about that, right? I will go over Gale's attitude later. Also during the scene, Gale tells Katniss that it's just hunting when he's referring to the games, but Katniss, of course, says, it's not the same thing. I mean, she's right. She will experience the trauma that comes with having to kill other humans, to kill other children to survive, versus having to hunt for food to survive. We just see in the scene, even at the very beginning of the series, how different Katniss and Gale think about this kind of stuff, how they view having to kill. This is not a quote from the book, actually. It's just a quote from the movie. It's in Mockingjay Part 2, but I want to put it here because I think it just really shows the difference between Katniss and Gale and how they still keep this core belief throughout the entire series. The scene is in Mockingjay Part 2 when they're about to bomb the nut, and Gale goes, "It's war, Katniss. Sometimes killing isn't personal. Figured if anyone knew that, it was you." And then Katniss, of course, responds, "I, of all people, know that it's always personal." Katniss sees areas of gray when Gale only sees in black and white. I will talk about Gale's mindset about war and killing later on, but I just want to point this out because it just gets a foundation from where his character ends up and the actions that his character takes. Okay, and lastly, I want to ask you guys something. When the peacekeepers come in to take Gale, he tells Katniss, "Remember," and then the door shuts, and we don't know what he was going to say. Katniss doesn't know what he was going to say, and we just never find out. Personally, I've always thought he was going to say, "I love you." If not those exact words, something along those lines. Not because this would have been just, the opportune moment to say that. In fact, it would have been a horrible moment to say that to her for the first time. It would have messed with Katniss's head, and who knows what kind of butterfly effect that would have had on her and Peeta's survival and the rest of the series if Gale decided to say that. But I've always thought that's what he was going to say. Again, not because it was a good thing to say at that moment, but because Gale already has feelings for her at this moment. He tells her that in Mockingjay that she's like, "Well, when did those feelings start? When they drug me off to the Capitol?" And he's like, "No, it's actually 6 months earlier during New Year's." So at this point, he already has feelings for her. And Gale can be selfish, especially when it comes to Katniss. So I 100% believe that he would have said that. Like, that is something he would have said in that moment, even though she definitely did not need that on top of everything else at the moment. Could see him saying that. And that's always kind of been my headcanon, what he was going to say. Now, I know some people don't think that's what he was going to say, that he was just going to say something like, "Oh, I'll take care of your family," or something like that. But it would kind of be redundant if he did say something like that, because one, she's already said, take care of them, don't let them starve. And then they also already have the agreement before this that if either of them got reaped, the other one that didn't would take care of the other's family. So I think it would be kind of redundant, and Katniss already knows. I mean, she's asking, like, make sure you take care of them, but she already knows that he's going to. So I just don't think that's what he would say after that. Like, remember this, because it would be kind of just repeating himself. I just want to know, what do you guys think that he was going to say in that moment? Because we never do 100% find out. Okay, now on to the reaping / the games. On the train, Katniss thinks, quote, "I imagine my home with its shutters drawn tight," which of course is a callback to chapter 1, because before the reaping, she says, quote, "But at least 2 families will pull their shutters, lock their doors, and try to figure out how to survive the painful weeks to come." And then we have Katniss and Gale fishing to get something nice for after the reaping. Katniss obviously won't be there, and then she wonders if her family was able to eat the supper of fish and strawberries. Back to Buttercup. I love Buttercup. Katniss has the thought of Buttercup comforting Prim if she starts crying after Katniss is taken, and then comparing that to after Prim is taken away permanently because she's dead, Buttercup and Katniss crying and then comforting each other. Katniss says that the chance Madge's name is drawn is very slim, but it's not impossible. It's both a parallel to Maisley being drawn and then also foreshadowing for a merchant to be drawn during the 74th reaping, which happens. PETA. Okay, back to Prim. We have Prim's ducktail. So before the reaping, Katniss, like I said, tells her, tuck your tail in, little duck. Prim's shirt coming untucked and forming the ducktail. That detail is what pulls Katniss out of her state of shock at both the reaping and when she sees Prim as a medic right before her death. Katniss mentions racketeers who take bets at the reaping. Haymitch, of course, talks about the Booker boys and the Callow family who take bets on the reaping. His fellow tribute, Wyatt Callow, is also obviously part of the Callow family, and he's an oddsmaker. And we have this parallel between Katniss and Haymitch. Katniss says, quote, when they televise the replay of the reapings tonight, everyone will make note of my tears, and I'll be marked as an easy target, a weakling. I will give no one that satisfaction. And then we have Haymitch's Sunrise on the Reaping quote, they will not use my tears for their entertainment. Next thing I want to talk about is District 12's reaction after Katniss volunteers. So I want to talk about this entire paragraph, so I'm just going to quote it. Of course, to the everlasting credit of the people of District 12, not one person claps, not even the ones holding betting slips, the ones who are usually beyond caring, possibly because they know me from the Hob, or knew my father, or have encountered Prim, who no one can help loving. So instead of acknowledging applause, I stand there unmoving, while they take part in the boldest form of dissent they can manage, silence, which says we do not agree, we do not condone, all of this is wrong. Which, oh, I love that quote. In that moment, we see the first little seeds of rebellion, and Katniss already inspiring others, already inspiring 12, even though she doesn't really realize it at the moment. They just essentially watched her sacrifice herself for her sister, because in District 12, volunteers are not common. And Katniss even says that the word volunteer is just synonymous with the word corpse, and Effie asking them to celebrate this by giving her a round of applause, and District 12 refusing to do that. It's just a small way that they can manage at this point to have a small act of rebellion by refusing to play the Capitol's games and entertaining this idea. And not only that, not just their silence, they also give her their district salute. Quote, at first one, then another, then almost every member of the crowd touches the 3 middle fingers of their left hand to their lips and holds it out to me. It's an old and rarely used gesture of our district, occasionally seen at funerals. It means thanks, it means admiration, it means goodbye to someone you love. Love that quote too. This salute also obviously becomes a symbol of the rebellion. So it's at this point that Haymitch drunkenly staggers onto the stage. I'm going to wait for sunrise for a lot of this, but this is just, I want to point it out right now. Haymitch already knows who Katniss is. I mean, not only is this the daughter of his deceased friend, but he also sees Luella McCoy in Katniss. His first real interaction with Katniss mirrors his last interaction with Luella, but they're in different ways. So what do I mean by that? They're both a fuck you to the Capitol and to Snow. So at this moment in the reaping, he's yelling that Katniss has a lot of spunk and that she has more than you. He's obviously talking to the people and probably Snow. And he's saying to the whole country, to Panem, to the Capitol, to President Snow, she has more courage than all of you, which also just foreshadows Katniss's role in the rebellion. And then the scene it mirrors with Luella is after Luella is killed, Haymitch picks her body up and then takes it to, and then lays her body at President Snow's feet and then just starts clapping sarcastically, which both instances are just a giant fuck you to Snow. I don't love that Luella died, but I love the mirroring in that. Back to Katniss volunteering, she says that her doing that was a radical thing, which is just another example of Katniss volunteering and it foreshadowing her role to come. When Katniss and Peeta are escorted into the Justice Building, they're escorted by peacekeepers, and Katniss wonders that maybe tributes have tried to escape in the past, but she's never seen it. We do get to see this in Sunrise on the Reaping, because Woodbine Chance is originally the second boy reaped for the 50th Hunger Games, and Woodbine does try to escape, but is shot down by a peacekeeper. And then we have this moment right here that foreshadows the end of the games. After Prim asks Katniss to promise to try to win, and Katniss doesn't believe she's going to be able to, she thinks, quote, kids from wealthier districts where winning is a huge honor, who've been trained their whole lives for this, boys who are 2 or 3 times my size, girls who know 20 different ways to kill you with a knife. Oh, there'll be people like me too, people to weed out before the real fun begins. So she's literally describing and foreshadowing the District 2 career tributes that she's going to face. The boys 2 or 3 times her size, Cato, and then we have Clove, the girl who knows 20 different ways to kill you with a knife. And then she thinks right now that she's one of the ones that are going to be weeded out before the fun begins. But that completely changes by the end of the games, because right before her and Peeta go to confront Kato for the final showdown, she says, quote, 21 tributes are dead, but I still have yet to kill Kato. And really, wasn't he always the one to kill? Now it seems the other tributes were just minor obstacles, distractions, keeping us from the real battle of the games, Kato and me. So she's completely turned that, like, I'm a weakling, I'm one of the ones that's gonna get weeded out, to, no, it was always going to come down to me and Kato. I wish I could talk about the Mockingjay pen right now, but I need to wait. But I am going to say this, because we do learn some stuff in Catching Fire, not just Sunrise on the Reaping. So Madge asked Katniss to wear the Mockingjay pen in the arena, and we learn in Catching Fire that the Mockingjay pen belonged to Madge's aunt, Maisie Donner, who was a tribute in the 50th Hunger Games that was killed. First time we get a mention of a Mockingjay is in chapter 3. And just the first sentence following Mockingjay is just so fitting. So Katniss says, quote, they're funny birds and something of a slap in the face to the capital, which is just amazing symbolism and foreshadowing for what the Mockingjays represent and what they come to represent, especially in the rebellion. Katniss mentions that in a previous Hunger Games, many of the contestants were bitten by venomous snakes or went insane from thirst, which, two things. One, it obviously makes me think of Lucy Gray and the 10th Hunger Games. I mean, obviously Lucy Gray had a love for snakes, and then the venomous snakes dropped in the arena. You also had all the tributes thirsty. The mentors were the ones sending in water. And then of course Jessup, who went mad but not from water, he was afraid of water because he had rabies. And then secondly, Katniss says that she particularly hated that year. Then she mentions the venomous snakes, which she always is comparing President Snow to snakes. So it's just, she's always hated that year because of the snakes, and then her obviously dislike of snow. I also want to talk about how Katniss views herself. All of the Hunger Games series, with the exception of Ballot, is written in first person. So we are only experiencing the world through the character that's narrating it, and with their experiences and their biases and everything in between. So Katniss does not view herself in the best light, and she projects that onto others as well, like their views of her. So she says that she doesn't think of District 12 as a place that cares about her, which is valid. I mean, from her perspective, she almost starved to death and no one helped her. I mean, realistically, especially in the Seam, no one was really in the position to do so, and starvation is just a very common thing in 12. But there are people that we learn about that do care about Katniss in 12, even if she doesn't really think there is or doesn't really realize it at this point. And then, of course, Joanna Mason, we get her named in the first Hunger Games book. So that's when, after they leave those goodbyes and they're going to the train, and Katniss sees that, you know, Peeta didn't try not to cry, she was like, well, maybe he was trying to pull a Joanna Mason, this is going to be his strategy. That worked for her a couple years ago. And then we get, quote, she seemed like such a sniveling, cowardly fool that no one bothered about her until there were only a handful of contestants left. It turned out she could kill viciously. Pretty clever the way she played it. From that, Katniss thinking that that may be possibly Peeta's strategy is just, it's just so Katniss. And she's even like, you know, that's going to be a hard thing to pull off for a baker's son who's big and buff. So poor Peeta, from his perspective, he just got reaped. And his district partner is the girl he's had a crush on since he was 5. He just said goodbye to his family and his friends, and he doesn't think he's ever going to see them again. And on top of that, his own mother, during their goodbyes, tells him that, oh, you know, maybe District 12 will finally have a victor because she's a survivor, that one. She's not even insinuating that she thinks Peeta would survive. She's saying, oh, maybe we'll finally have a victor because of Katniss, which, I mean, she's not wrong, but I hate her. Anyway, Peeta is just grieving and he's scared at this moment, and he's not hiding his emotions or trying to put on any persona, and he's just being real. And Katniss, she's already thinking of ways to stay alive in the arena, like not crying so she won't appear weak and be marked as a target. So she's assuming that Peeta is also already doing this, already calculating his actions as well. She does this in chapter 4 too. So after dragging a vomit-covered Haymitch to the shower, Peeta offers to take care of Haymitch so that Katniss doesn't have to. Because, you know, she does not want to strip down Haymitch and wash out the vomit. So she's thinking, well, maybe he's trying to, you know, make a good impression on Haymitch and become his favorite. You know, that he's not even going to remember this tomorrow. So that's not a very smart move. And then she offers to get one of the Capitol attendants, and he says, you know, no, I don't want them here. And she agrees, like, oh, I wouldn't want the Capitol to help me anyway. But she also thinks that making them wash the vomit out of Haymitch's chest hair would be some form of revenge. But then that's when she finally realizes, oh, he's just being kind. And I'm not saying that Peeta isn't clever or intelligent or can't be manipulative or doesn't plan, but he just is genuinely a kind person. After they arrive to the Capitol, Peeta starts waving and smiling to the crowd, and he says to Katniss, you know, who knows, maybe one of them will be rich, meaning he's starting to play the game. But Katniss takes this as confirmation that all of his actions leading up to this have been part of some scheme of his or plan to stay alive. So him squeezing her hand at the reaping, his father bringing her cookies, him, helping Haymitch, him washing Haymitch, him challenging Haymitch. They've all been part of this, plan of his to stay alive. And she thinks, quote, all of the pieces are still fitting together, but I sense he has a plan for me. He hasn't accepted his death. He's already fighting hard to stay alive. Which also means that Kai and Peeta Mellark, the boy who gave me the bread, is fighting hard to kill me. I mean, he does have a plan, but not all of these actions are some scheme to keep himself alive. Again, Katniss is 16 going to go fight to the death. You get where she's coming from. She's projecting kind of what she's doing onto Peeta because she is constantly planning okay, I need to project this image so she can survive in the game. So she's kind of projecting that onto Peeta, thinking he's also being very conscientious about how he's being portrayed. But Peeta is just a kind person. I don't think all of this was just some big plan to get Haymitch in his favor. I mean, he's surprised later when Katniss brings up the fact that his dad brought her cookies. Katniss in that moment too is just he's a good actor. Maybe he's faking being surprised. I'm not bashing. The only character I'm really going to be bashing is Mrs. Mellark and Gale and Snow and Coin. I love Katniss. So I'm just saying that Katniss is in survival mode and she's not a trusting person. So on top of that and where they're going, only one of them can make it out alive. So from her perspective, she's not thinking that Peeta is actively going to, slit her throat in the arena or something. She's just thinking he's fighting to stay alive and only one of us can go home. So if he's fighting hard to stay alive, he's fighting hard for my death. Back to when they're watching the recap of the reapings. There's specific tributes that stand out to Katniss that have a bigger role in the games. So we have the District 2 boy, Cato, obviously, who is the last tribute that Katniss and Peeta face in the arena. Foxface is the one that inadvertently warns Katniss that the career supplies have been booby-trapped, and then Foxface being the second to last tribute that pose a threat to Katniss and Peeta, and then Peeta unintentionally poisoning Foxface with Nightlock. Of course, finally, we have Rue, who is Katniss's ally, and she becomes a martyr for the rebellion. Katniss also immediately associates her with Prim. They have different skin tones, but they are both very similar in size and demeanor, and they're the same age. Also, like Prim, Rue's name is called at her first reaping, but unlike Prim, there's no one there to take her place. And then I just want to point out the wording in this. So when they ask for volunteers in 11, Katniss says, all you can hear is the wind whistling through the decrepit building around her, which the wind whistling just makes me think of Rue's whistle. And then this one sentence has so much meaning. The Hunger Games aren't a beauty contest, but the best looking tribute always seems to pull more sponsors. I'm going to have to be very careful how I discuss this because I don't want my stuff to get restricted. But one, we obviously know Finnick Odair is known for his good looks, and he won his games, youngest ever at 14, and he got the most expensive sponsor gift, which was a trident. And that was because of his looks, pretty much. And then we learn throughout the series what happens to desirable victors. So they are sold and they are abused and just horrible stuff happens to them after the arena. I will go more into that when we get to Glimmer and then obviously with Finnick. Some extra Katniss details. This is a very small detail, but the outfit that Katniss chooses after she takes off her reaping dress is a dark green shirt with pants, and green is her favorite color. Katniss, throughout the books, always mentions what she's eating, like specifically what dishes are being served. Food is very important to her. She grew up in a very food-scarce environment, so it's not surprising that she takes note of what she's eating, and she's in awe and she's disgusted about the delicacies that the Capitol has at their disposal and like the excess and the waste of it. And then while they're eating, Effie makes a remark about how she's happy that Katniss and Peeta have manners unlike the pair from last year. And then Katniss does this, quote, I hate Effie Trinket's comments so much, I make a point of eating the rest of my meal with my fingers. Then I wipe my hands off the tablecloth. This makes her purse her lips tightly together, which is just so petty and it's funny and it just shows Katniss's defiant nature. And along that same line, Katniss says, quote, one time my mother told me that I always eat like I'll never see food again. And I said, I won't unless I bring it home. That shut her up, which just shows more of her snarky attitude and then her anger around her mother. Katniss is not wasteful with resources, even if she has an abundance of them at her fingertips. So a very small example of this that we see is her putting back on the clothes that she wore the evening before on the train because they weren't dirty, and she chooses to rewear that instead of picking out the wardrobe that she's been provided. She's like, why would I waste another pair of clothes? This one's perfectly fine. Another thing with how Katniss views herself is she also always underestimates herself. So she knows she's good with a bow, but she also thinks that, oh, my father was better. And then she knows how to throw a knife. She knows how to use a knife, but she still will minimize her own skills. So after the scene with Haymitch and Peeta and Katniss kind of getting into it on the train, Katniss goes to throw the knife and she says, quote, I was actually just hoping to get a good solid stick, but it lodges in the seam between two panels, making me look a lot better than I am. Could it have actually been a lucky shot? Sure, but Katniss is also known for underestimating her skills, and we know she has good aim, so this could just be an example of that. Now, on to Peeta. No matter how much the media, specifically the media surrounding the movies, wants to just pretend that the Hunger Games is just this big love triangle, which it's not, and it's ironic that that's kind of what they latched onto. There's barely even a love triangle to begin with. I'm not saying that love and relationships aren't a big driving point in the series, because they are. There's different types of them throughout the series. You have the romantic love and relationships. You have familial and friendships that are big driving points throughout the series. This whole series kicks off because of Katniss's love for Prim. And then Peeta also becomes a big driving point for Katniss. And I will talk about there being symbolism with Peeta representing peace and Gale representing war in Mockingjay. But even in the very beginning of the series, there are moments that symbolize what Peeta and Katniss's relationship will become. Gale was never really in the running. If you think she should have ended up with Gale, argue with the wall. And I hope after this deep dive series, you really understand the series a lot better. Anyway, here's a very little scene that you may have missed or forgotten about, and you definitely didn't know about this if you just watched the movies. But it just has some symbolic meaning in it. After Katniss throws the cookies out of the train, it lands in a patch of dandelions, which Katniss and us readers associate dandelions with Peeta and with hope. So by throwing the cookies out, she's trying to, like, not have anything to do with Peeta. But that fails because it lands in a patch of dandelions, which is what Katniss associates with Peeta. So that doesn't really work with her throwing the cookies out of the train. Just like her not really having anything to do with Peeta doesn't work either. And not letting him in doesn't work. And then we get a little, I guess I want to call it like lighthearted moment between Katniss and Peeta when they're joking about Haymitch being drunk. They're taking the piss out of him, which Haymitch does the same thing to them. Here's another thing I want to ask you guys about. I want to know what transpired at breakfast before Katniss showed up, because whatever it was, it had Effie, quote, muttering obscenities under her breath. Haymitch, his face puffy and red from the previous day's indulgences, is chuckling. Peeta holds a roll and looks somewhat embarrassed. Okay, Peeta does not get embarrassed easily, except when he's talking about his crush on Katniss. So is this where Peeta told Haymitch that he had a crush on Katniss and he wanted to save her instead of himself, and Haymitch made a snarky remark or made an inappropriate joke, which made Effie start muttering curses, and then that embarrassed Peeta because of the joke or the snarky comment that Haymitch made? Because I can definitely see that happening. And we also know that 16-year-old Haymitch was in everybody's business, or at least he was as a narrator. He's in everyone's business, which is the exact opposite of Katniss's narration. So it's safe to assume that Haymitch probably knows about Peeta's father Otho wanting to end up with Astrid and her running off with Burdock. So did he make a remark about something like that, like that with Peeta and his dad, like comparing them or something? Because I can see that. What do you guys think was going on in that moment? That's what I think was going on. We also get the first instance here of Peeta fighting back. And that even surprises Katniss because he's just so mild-tempered. We see him lashing out and catching fire, and this is kind of like a precursor to that. So when Haymitch is being a smartass and tells him to stay alive, Peeta's like, oh, very funny, and then knocks the drink out of Haymitch's hand. So we get to see a little bit of that fire in Peeta. We also get the first moment of Katniss and Peeta having each other's backs and fighting together. Because after he says that, Haymitch punches Peeta and knocks him down, and then he goes to grab another drink. And then that's when Katniss stabs the knife in between his hand and the bottle. So they're already having each other's backs in this moment. Can I just say, poor Peeta again, because he just got punched in the face by his mentor, who's supposed to be someone that's going to help him. And he's already had experience his entire life with his mother, who is supposed to care about him, doing the exact same thing. Speaking of Haymitch, I'm going to just quickly add this parallel that Haymitch punches Peeta on the train to the Capitol. And Drusilla, District 12's escort at the time, slaps Maisley, and Maisley just slaps right back. After Peeta knocks the drink out of his hand, he sits there for a moment and then he punches him. So is he remembering this moment between Drusilla and Maisie and wants to see if Peeta will fight back like Maisie did, or if he's just all talk? I mean, maybe. And then after Katniss stabs the table, he says, well, what's this? Did I actually get a pair of fighters this year? And, that's just an understatement for his 2 tributes. And this last bit with Haymitch. Haymitch asks Katniss, can you hit anything with that beside the table? And the knife is one of Haymitch's main weapons, and it's the weapon he chooses to sleep with that night. And the last thing I want to talk about is also about Katniss and her not believing in the kindness that others show her, especially Peeta. She doesn't expect Madge to come say goodbye to her after the reaping. It's only after Madge leaves she realizes, oh, Madge has been my friend all along. So even though they are constantly together at school, like, Madge thinks they're friends, and Katniss just doesn't let herself believe that they're friends until this moment. I will discuss the whole bread seed later on, but I just want to go back to my point of how Katniss views herself, because she doesn't believe that someone, Peeta, would have burned the bread on purpose to help her, which is what happened. She just thinks, oh, it's kind that he just happened to burn this bread and decided to give it to me. That was an enormous act of kindness, and doesn't believe that he would be kind enough to and actually care enough to take a beating for it and burn the bread on purpose, which is exactly what happened, but she doesn't believe that, because she even thinks about, well, maybe he did it on purpose, and then she just dismisses that thought because, quote, it must have just been an accident. Why would he have done it? He didn't even know me. And that she just couldn't explain his actions. It's just another thing of Katniss not believing that others can be kind to her, that she deserves kindness, because they don't know her. Why would they be kind to her? And then lastly, we have Peeta squeezing her hand in reassurance after the reaping, and she just says, quote, Peeta looks me right in the eye and gives my hand what I think is meant to be a reassuring squeeze. Maybe it's just a nervous spasm. So she immediately gaslights herself when she thinks, oh, Peeta's giving my hand a reassuring squeeze, and then she's like, no, maybe it's just a nervous spasm. Why would he be doing that? It's not like we're going to fight to the death. Even that little moment, she gaslights herself and thinks, oh no, that couldn't be, that couldn't be what happened. Now I'm going to jump into symbolism with names and plants and all of that. Katniss, of course, the plant. To quote Suzanne Collins directly, Katniss's name, quote, came later while I was researching survival training and specifically edible plants. In one of my books, I found the arrowhead plant, and the more I read about it, the more it seemed to reflect her. Its Latin name has the same roots as the Sagittarius, the archer. The edible tuber root she could gather, the arrowhead-shaped leaves were her defense, and the little white blossoms kept in tradition with the flower names like rue and primrose. I looked at a list of alternate names for it: swamp potato, duck potato. Katniss easily won the day. Also, I want to point out something I found, because a lot of people think that in the books, Katniss is described as being Native American. I found this it's from USDA, and it says about Katniss plants. The USDA says that Native American women, quote, collected it in shallow water from a canoe or waded into ponds or marshes in the late summer and loosened the roots with their toes. The roots would rise to the top of the water where they were gathered and tossed into floating baskets, which is pretty much just exactly what Katniss says. She says, I spent hours staring at the pond bed with my toes and a stick, gathering the tubers that floated to the top. So I just thought that was neat, because a lot of people think of Katniss as Native American or indigenous, and that's something right there that it just parallels with what Suzanne wrote. This is also kind of a tangent, but I just want to say that the USDA also said that swans, geese, and that different types of ducks and other wildlife eat those seeds and the tubers, which ducks, Prim, geese, Haymitch, and Lenore Dove. And not only are the tubers of Katniss edible, the plant also has medicinal properties. And then we have the evening primrose, which is what Prim's named for. It is a medicinal plant, and the primrose represents love, youth, innocence, new beginnings, hope, and transformation. And I found that during the Victorian era, it represented young love and saying, I can't live without you. And both the flower and the leaves are edible. Lastly, a fun fact about this is I was always destined for this to be obsessed with the Hunger Games, because I was born in February and my birth month flower is a primrose. Okay, so what does the name Everdeen mean? According to Suzanne Collins, Katniss's last name Everdeen came from the character, I'm going to butcher this, but Bathsheba Everdeen in the 1874 novel Far from the Maddening Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Bathsheba is if you know how to say that, please let me know. She is the main female character in the book, and according to Suzanne, the two are very different, but both struggled with knowing their hearts. Okay, on to hawthorn, which I found some interesting stuff about hawthorn. In folklore, the hawthorn shrub/tree represents protection and love. It also represents duality, because it's pretty flowers that bloom in May, which again, May is when Katniss and Prim were both born, and its sharp thorns. It represents protection, but also bad luck and death. It's linked to May Day celebrations, which, among other things, celebrates summer's victory over winter, snow. And then I went down a rabbit hole. I found this book from 1907 by Henry Irving called Flowers and Plants for Designers and Schools. And the hawthorn has, quote, been associated with lore and legend for innumerable years. It is paired with a black thorn and, as a rule, represents good as opposed to the evil influences of the latter. The blossom of the hawthorn must on no account be brought into a house during the month of the same name, or death will occur before the end of the year. I just want to point that out, that hawthorns can represent protection, but also death, which I think is a really good way to describe Gale. Next, we have the dandelion, which I've already kind of touched on, but it represents resilience, perseverance, hope, transformation, and strength. It symbolizes fighting through and surviving challenges, as well as life, death, and rebirth. I will definitely be talking about this in Mockingjay. It represents healing through grief and from emotional and physical wounds, as well as the ability to thrive under difficult circumstances. And then pita, if you spell it P-I-T-A, is a type of bread, and the spelling pita, P-E-T-A, or Peter, are both from Greek origin and being rock or stone, which I think it's probably supposed to symbolize pita being, Katniss's rock, but I also think it's kind of funny to think about it symbolizing Peeta camouflaging himself as a rock in the riverbed during the games. So there's that. Buttercup is a medicinal flower, and it represents joy, innocence, happiness, and childlike wonder, which is just so fitting for Prim giving him that name. Coal, it can represent purification and transformation. In Appalachian cultures, coal miners also represent resilience and community. Gold, which represents wealth, luxury, greed, and materialism. But it can also represent transformation, resilience, endurance, and strength, because the Mockingjay pen is made out of gold. Ducks, adaptability, serenity, and grace, as well as nurturing. Ducks also have strong familial bonds. Cats, they represent independence and self-sufficiency, and an untamed nature, as well as comfort. Goats, so they can represent sacrifice, and they can also represent sin being transferred to an innocent or being purified through fire, which Prim obviously isn't innocent, and so is Katniss. I mean, she's a child too, that's being forced to pay for the quote-unquote sins of her ancestors. And then we have Purified Through Fire, which Katniss will become known as the Girl on Fire. Mockingbirds, which represent innocence, imitation, and adaptability, protection, transformation, individuality, and freedom of expression. Which I will say, as someone who's from Texas, our state bird is a mockingbird. Mockingjays. Mockingbirds can be very mean when they're protecting their nest. Rabbit. It can represent salvation, abundance, longevity, and new beginnings, which I think is kind of fitting because that's the first thing Katniss hunts successfully on her own without her father. And then, no joke, on a website called rabbit.org, they're talking about rabbits in Native American folklore. Again, Native American. Quote, these stories emphasize the rabbit's ability to navigate complex situations, reflecting the idea that intelligence and strategy can triumph over brute strength. Which is just the District 12 victors. I mean, Katniss, Lucy Gray, Haymitch, and Peeta. They can all, yes, they're strong in their own ways, but the intelligence and strategy over brute strength, like the careers, that's all of District 12 victors. Velvet, which represents power, luxury, and status, and hot chocolate, which is a symbol of wealth and sophistication, but also in an older, different form than what we know as hot chocolate today. The Aztecs used to drink this for funerals, marriages, and it was drank by warriors. Blackberries, this is what Katniss and Gale are eating when they're sitting there in the woods talking. They symbolize protection and resilience, but in folklore, they're also sometimes associated with bad omens, which is just so fitting. Strawberries represent goodness, purity, love, respect, and spirituality. And an apple tree, which is what Katniss sits under when Peeta throws her the bread, it can symbolize love, future happiness, good health, and a place of rest and shelter. There's a couple other things that are mentioned. They don't really tie in enough for me to kind of talk about them right now, like basil and the specific bread that Peeta threw her. So I'm just gonna leave that out for now. But if you guys want me to go through everything, even if it's just like a little bit, I will definitely do that, but I think this is long enough. Finally, I'm going to go over a little bit of symbolism with these and also what they are. Mockingjays and Jabberjays. Jabberjays are mutations created and used for the capital during the Dark Days. These are exclusively male birds, and they were sent into known rebel regions where they would record and return back to the capital. Once the rebels caught on, they would feed them lies. So the program was terminated, and then the Jabberjays were released to die out in the wild. But before they did, they mated with female mockingbirds, creating a new species, a Mockingjay. The Jabberjay, in short, symbolizes the capital's failure. Mockingjays. So like I said, it was the species created by Jabberjays and Mockingjays. They lost the ability to enunciate words, but they have the ability to mimic a range of human vocal sounds. They also can recreate songs. If you sing to them and they like your voice, they will sing back. They're also a slap in the face to the capital. because it's something that grew from their failure and evolved into something else, and they survived despite the Capitol's plans. They are a symbol of rebellion and will become even more so, which I will touch on later. I mentioned liking some quotes earlier, so now I'm just going to go over some more quotes that I love, or they hold a lot of weight for the series, or just some iconic lines. So a lot of these are just quotes from Katniss. District 12, where you can starve to death in safety. Gale says, "I never smile except in the woods." This line, I really feel, we have to joke about it because the alternative is to be scared out of your wits. Which, as someone who uses humor as a coping mechanism, I really feel that line. I try to forgive her for my father's sake, but to be honest, I'm not the forgiving type. How could I leave Prim, who is the only person in the world I'm certain that I love? Surprisingly, I have a couple quotes from Gale. It's to the Capitol's advantage to have us divided among ourselves. Yep, exactly. There's also the moment where he tells Katniss, wear something pretty for the reaping, which is just funny because he's being a smartass, and then he's also calling back to Madge saying she wanted to look pretty if she had to go to the Capitol. And then we have this other quote by Katniss. "I protect Prim in every way I can, but I'm powerless against the reaping. Desperately hoping that it's not me, that it's not me, that it's not me." And then, and it's not me. It's Primrose Everdeen. We have this moment of kind of like dark humor after Katniss is thinking about the fact that she never thanked Peeta for the bread, and she's not going to get the opportunity to do that now because, quote, "because we're going to be thrown into an arena to fight to the death. Exactly how am I supposed to work in a thank you in there? Somehow it just won't seem sincere if I'm trying to slit his throat." And that's just funny. This quote, "Besides, it isn't in my nature to go down without a fight, even when things seem insurmountable. To this day, I can never shake the connection between this boy, Peeta Millark, and the bread that gave me hope, and the dandelion that reminded me that I was not doomed." Right in my heart. And it just parallels so much with Katniss's thoughts in the last chapter of Mockingjay. Haymitch's, of course, "here's some advice, stay alive," it kind of became an inside joke between all three of them. And they also added this in Mockingjay Part 2. It wasn't in the book, but it was in the movie. They added Katniss saying this to Peeta before they're about to separate and have the final showdown in the Capitol. She tells Peeta to stay alive.
Stay alive.
Referencing this moment. And I remember watching that in theaters and bursting into tears at that moment. This is just a funny quote Katniss says about Effie. "I try and imagine for a moment what it must be like inside that woman's head." It also makes me think of the meme now with the, "Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?" Which I found out is from Inside Out. And lastly, of course, I could not leave this out, I volunteer as tribute. So I'm specifically deep diving the books, but like you've seen throughout, I've mentioned a couple things from the movies that are not in the books. At the end of each episode, I'm going to cover some things that they left out in the movies, major changes. I'm going to try to keep the list on the shorter side because I could go over like little details too, but I'm going to try to just stick with the bigger changes. First, Madge. Madge is completely gone. She's not in the movies, which, I mean, I understand, I guess, them cutting her out, but she was Katniss's only other friend, and she's Katniss's only female friend at this point. And also, Madge gives her the Mockingjay pen, which makes sense. Madge is from a merchant family. It was passed down, and it's really symbolic with the history. Katniss does not just find a gold Mockingjay pen in the Hob and get it for free from Greasy Stay. Like, it doesn't really make sense. So I wonder now, because they changed that in the first movie, how they're going to go about that in Sunrise on the Reaping. Because in the books, Merrily obviously ended up with it and gives it to Madge. And then Madge gives it to Katniss. It's going to be taking away some of the history and the lore with the Mockingjay pen. And, I mean, we do learn about the Mockingjay pen and its original owner, Maisie Lee Donner, in Catching Fire, but now we have so much more history with it, with the book, that they're obviously going to have to cut out some of it, and they're going to have to try to show us a way of the Mockingjay pen ending up in the Hob. So maybe in the movie, the Donner family will just get rid of it because they don't want the reminder, maybe. And then it just somehow, 25 years later, has ended up in the Hob. Them taking out Madge in the movies, just, it really kind of takes away a lot of the meaning behind the Mockingjay pen that was in the books. I'm not going to go into detail in all of these. It's just Madge is very important and major change. Here's some more rapid fire ones. The mayor reads the Treaty of Treason. There's no film from the Capitol like they show in the movies. Haymitch's nosedive off the stage and him yelling at the Capitol is just gone. Effie's reaping outfit is different. In the movie, she's wearing all pink, but in the book, she has a spring green outfit on with a pinkish wig. In the books, the kids are marked off with the youngest in the back and the oldest in the front, and in the movies, it's flipped. It's not actually specified in the book how you check in for the reaping. In the movie, they show them going in and checking in by getting their finger pricked and it scanning a little drop of blood. They get an hour for goodbyes in the book. In the movie, the Peacekeeper tells the Everdeens that they have 3 minutes. The baker coming to visit Katniss and giving her their cookies is just gone. In the movie, Katniss doesn't leave her hair up in the braid that her mother did until they reach the Capitol. In the book, she does. And Cinna actually tells Katniss' prep team not to touch it because he loves it so much. There is no "that is mahogany" line in the book, but it's iconic in the movie. That whole scene in general is different than it is in the book. The scene with Haymitch drunkenly coming in and vomiting all over himself is cut. So that's just a few of the differences between the book and the movie. I just want to add in a couple fun facts. Jennifer Lawrence and Josh Hutcherson are both from modern day District 12, Kentucky. And then lastly, the iconic Mockingjay symbol is not actually how it's described in the books, even though it's on the book cover. This is how Katniss describes it in the book. It's as if someone fashioned a small golden bird and then attached a ring around it. The bird is connected to the ring only by its wingtips. There's no mention of an arrow. And the Mockingjay pin in the movie is the one on the book cover. So the only time that the Mockingjay pin is actually biblically accurately portrayed, the Mockingjay Part 1 symbol, and then in the Hunger Games Illustrated Edition, the Mockingjay pin is book accurate. And just to kind of wrap it up, I'm going to say my major Hunger Games theory that I have been saying for a while, and I hadn't seen anybody else talk about it until like very recently. And I was like, what? I've been saying this, but I'm going to put it out here right now. So here's my theory about the next Hunger Games book we will be getting. Yes, I think we are getting at least one more Hunger Games book for a couple reasons. Because Suzanne Collins writes in 3 acts. Each Hunger Games book is broken down into 3 acts. Also, what I noticed, it was like months and months ago, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and this just popped in my head and I texted my friend immediately. I noticed this about the length of the book titles. They go in descending order in chronological order. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is 6 words. There's no 5. Then we have 4, Sunrise on the Reaping. 3, The Hunger Games. 2, Catching Fire. And 1, Mockingjay. I noticed this so long ago and I want to talk about it. Okay. So I think we are going to get another book. We will have a trilogy of prequels, and then I think it's going to take place in between the time when Ballad ends and the time when Sunrise starts. We've got to see the 75th Quarter Quell, and we've got to see the 50th Quarter Quell. I think we'll be seeing the 25th Quarter Quell. Now the question is, who would that book be about? I've seen people say Plutarch. I have not 100% locked in on an answer, but I am like really confident in the fact that it's going to take place during the 25th Quarter Quell, because we already know what happens during that Quarter Quell. Each district has to vote on who the tributes are, and we've already seen the other 2 Quarter Quells. So I think it's really reasonable to assume that this book would take place for the 25th, and it's in between Ballad and Sunrise. So it works perfectly for my titles and timelines theory. So who do I think it would be about? We haven't seen anyone that's like capital, but also a rebel. So maybe it could be about Tigress, because we don't know what happens between the Tigress and Snow we see in Ballad versus Tigress and Mockingjay. Tigress was a stylist for the games at one point, so it would make sense with Tigress being a stylist at the games at that point. I've seen people throw around Cinna. I don't think that really works out with the timeline, because that would mean that Cinna is older than Haymitch, and Haymitch was 16 during the 50th Hunger Games, and I just don't think Cinna is not that old. I've also seen people talk about Plutarch, which would be a very different perspective than what we've got. We have the rebels in the games, and then we have the rise to power and the corruption with Snow. And also, Suzanne Collins only writes when she has something to say, just like Lucy Gray only sings when she has something to say. Sunrise was about propaganda. I mean, it's about so much more, but like propaganda is a major driving point in Sunrise on the Reaping. And there's just so much bad stuff going on in the world. There's so many topics that I could see Suzanne Collins covering in another Hunger Games book during the Quarter Quell. So anyway, that is my theory for it. I want to know your guys' theories down below. If you say Lucy Gray is coin, I'm banning you. Okay, there's been some crazy stuff. I don't go on Facebook, but there's been some crazy stuff going on in the Hunger Games Facebook group. It's become a meme at this point of people just thinking everybody is Lucy Gray. But anyway, I'm not actually going to ban you. I'm just joking. And that is it for the first episode in District Deep Dive. Next episode, I will be covering chapters 5 through 8. which is the arrival in the capital all the way up to the final interviews. A fun fact about this episode, I was almost done filming it. I've been filming for almost 3 hours right now, and I had been filming for like 2.5 hours. I was almost done, and then my phone was about to die, so I got up and I checked my mic and I didn't hit record. I filmed for 2.5 hours and it was all gone. And because I couldn't use the audio because it sounded like crap just on my phone. And I already had spent an hour setting up this mic. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with your fellow Hunger Games fans. If you have any suggestions on the length, on what topics you want me to cover, things you wish I didn't go over, things you wish I did, your thoughts on scenes, on book theories, I want to hear it all. Comment anything you want to comment down below, because like I said, it really does help with the algorithm. And I have spent, you don't want to know how long preparing for this first episode. And make sure you hit the bell icon so you get notified every time I post a new episode. I have been working on the series for a while and I am working extremely hard on it. So I really hope you guys enjoyed it. You can also follow my regular Instagram and TikTok account, which is just my name, Hannah Biddick. Also follow the accounts I have made specifically for this series. On Instagram, it is Hannah Everdeen 12. And on TikTok, it is Hannah Everdeen. Now that I have officially filmed this thing twice, I'm going to go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye, guys.